Welcome back, guys, to the series Homosexuality in the Bible, 6 verses that causes division. Today in episode 2, we're going to be going over 2 verses in Leviticus 18:22 and Leviticus 20:13, to see if this is the same as Genesis 19, where it does not condemn the practice of homosexuality, or to see if it does. So let's get into it. Let's read Leviticus 18:22 first. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. And then Leviticus 20, verse 13 says this. If a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them. I want to give you a little context behind why the book of Leviticus was written in the first place. And it's because the Israelites, the Jewish people, the Hebrews, had just gotten out of 400 years of slavery to the Egyptians. And throughout that 400 years, a lot of the false gods and false teachings and false idol worship was embedded in their hearts, was embedded in the lives of these Jewish Hebrew people, and God wanted to not only deliver them physically from Egypt, but deliver Egypt out of their hearts and minds and souls, and to give them, or rather to help them come back to serving God in the way that He always intended these Jewish people to serve Him in. Now, the first thing that I want to say here is that in these verses, it doesn't say that these men partaking in these sexual practices are themselves an abomination, but it does point out that the abomination lies within the practice that they are doing with one another. So I just want to let all of you know that regardless of if these verses are condemning or affirming the practice of homosexuality or some version of it, it's not on either side condemning the people, or specifically saying that the people are themselves an abomination. Now, the second thing I want to say is, in this, it doesn't seem to suggest that there is exploitation going on here or excessive lust going on here within these verses. It actually seems to point to consensual, monogamous sexual practices between both males in this. And how do I come to that conclusion? Well, the first thing is, in Leviticus 20:13, it quite literally says that both of these males are partaking in a practice that God calls an abomination. But not only that, it says that both of them are to be put to death. Now, why is this significant? Well, it's significant because if this was some type of exploitation from one male to the other, if this was some type of any sort from one male to the other, only one of them would be punished and put to death, not both of them. You should ask yourself this: why should both of these males in these verses be punished and put to death if this is some sort of exploitation going on from one of the males? Why not the perpetrator, the one committing this act of violence, be put to death? Why the victim? In Deuteronomy 22, it actually gives an example of the victim not being put to death for what's happened to her or him, but actually the one committing the violence against this victim. And it says this: but if in the open country a man meets a young woman who is betrothed, and the man seizes her and lies with her, then only the man who lay with her shall die. But you shall do nothing to the young woman. She has committed no offense punishable by death. For this case is like that of a man attacking and murdering his neighbor, because he met her in the open country. And though the betrothed young woman cried for help, there was no one to rescue her. So you see how God feels about those who are taken advantage of in a sexual way, that He doesn't punish the victim, but He punishes the one who is committing the act of violence towards this victim. And so I don't believe that we can conclude, as some do based off of these verses, that God is condemning exploitation between these males lying with one another, or some sort of act against one male towards another, because if that was the case, both males wouldn't have been put to death. These males were partaking in sexual intercourse monogamously and consensually with one another. The third thing that I want to point out is this. we do have to be careful that we don't take Old Testament verses and then try to apply them to this day and age, because there was 613 Old Testament laws, and we don't have to keep, as Christians, 613 of these Levitical laws. But I also want us to be careful not just to take these verses and apply it to the first century, to the 21st century right away, but also be careful in the sense that we can't just outright say, oh, because these verses are in Leviticus, because these verses are in the Old Testament, we ought not to abide by these any longer. We ought not to pay attention or take heed to these verses at all in our everyday life. I want you to be careful in doing that and coming to that conclusion, because if you're going to do that with these two verses, you have to do that with all the other ones in regards to adultery, in regards to incest, in regards to witchcraft and necromancy, in regards to animal sexual intercourse, and all these other things that Leviticus lays out that a lot of us, Christian or not actually, still abide by keeping according to the Levitical law here today. You can't fall on both camps. You have to stay in the middle of this, because of the simple fact is the New Testament may have changed its mind on the practice of homosexuality. I think that today, through Leviticus 18:22 and Leviticus 20:13, we can conclude that God is condemning the practice of male and males being together, having sexual intercourse, but we can't come to that entire conclusion if God is applying this for the 21st century, because this is the Old Testament. These do fall under Levitical laws, but let's see what the New Testament has to say in our next episode.